Ophelia and Sue Miller were the two daughters within a 5-headed family. They originated from Rainburg and worked in a windmill which brought enough money to cover all their needs at first. The eldest sibling, a son 5 years older than Sue, quickly moved out as he was old enough to open up his own business in Bota. Shortly afterwards, the mother of Ophelia died of an illness at 49 years old, similarly to the father's first beloved wife. Still, the shrunken family kept their daily life up, and with equal success. Yet the father, being fond of merchants and other people who knew more about the world than he did, noticed the danger of a civil war early on and thought it necessary to keep his two daughters safe. At first they went to search for the older brother, but learned he had given up on his old career to work further up in the ranks to see more of Bota's structure, and therefore went to seek a profession at the castle. He had become a guard after successfully completing 3 years of training and doing his service in the city. It had been far easier than expected for the rest of the relatives to join him. Little Ophelia, who was about 10 years old at that time, saw him as a role model and pursued the same profession as him and dragged Sue with her. The older sister was worried about the girl alone in a fight and therefore stayed as some sort of patron. Many were surprised by Ophelia's decision. As a snake hybrid and a girl who would be a woman at some point, people expected her to find the idea of marrying well and being a housewife in a secure environment more charming than wielding a sword. In general, she behaved more like a ferret in a playful mood than an elegant serpent in beautiful scales. It took a little longer for her than her brother to finally get the permission to start training with her sister, but she loved every second of it. There was no exceeding amount of strength, reflexes, or elegance to be found in her, yet she was passionate to achieve as much as she could, even if it meant being kicked through the mud by the other training boys her age. Sue certainly was the more gifted one out of the two, but never bragged about her noticeable physical strength or tactical intellect. The family didn't share a place to live inside the castle. Their brother lived down in the city where he served, while the father had been taken into a home for elderly people. Ophelia and Sue had their rooms right next to each other, but they were so small there was no way of living together comfortably. Still, Sue sat at Ophelia's bed every night until she fell asleep, and every morning the little one came knocking at her door in return to drag her to breakfast. As time went on, a notice reached them from their homeland. The foretold civil war had broken out all over the kingdom of Rainburg. The old windmill had been burnt down to its foundation as the royal knights had been sent to take down the revolting farmers and craftsmen who had gotten tired of the high taxes and oppression through their landlords. Even though they feared for their old friends, they were happy to have escaped this situation and now inhabited a place where they could be safe from most evils, so close to the king, his wealth and army. At least so they thought. More and more often did noble families express their discontent towards the king. He was widowed, and there was no heir to the throne known to live inside the borders of Bota. The father of him had been banished, and was known to have several children of his own, but it would be seen as even more of a scandal to have the spawn of a sinner as their ruler. Meanwhile, through the expansion of the underground human trade market, hybrids all over the place felt threatened and performed their own small acts of rebellion against the core principles of Bota's creation, seeing hybrids as literal treasure, something someone would want to possess. In addition to all of that, their father fell sick. The brother had to partially give up on his job to take care of the elderly man. Ophelia was 15 when he succumbed to it. Since then she talked less. After all, she had worshipped him as much as her brother. At least Sue thought it to be the major reason for the sudden change of behavior. The sisters began to meet less and less. It began with Ophelia simply skipping training or consciously choosing different shifts and small jobs separate from their sister. Then, every once in a while, she didn't wake her up in the morning, which accidentally led to Sue oversleeping. When she did arrive after hastily getting ready, Ophelia wasn't there. Neither was she in her own room when Sue checked. Sometimes you would find the snake hybrid wandering through the halls in a dazed state. She wouldn't or couldn't talk clearly for the next hour or so, and mostly didn't make it to training with Sue. It became more and more frequent over the 2 months until she didn't wake up her sister at all, but stayed in her room for most of the time. At sunset she would go out goddess knows where. Sue decided to follow her one night without her knowing and saw she was going to a bar. Like an addict she drank at barely 16 years old, throwing her earned money into the bottom of a barrel. The older sister confronted her, locked her in her room the next night, and hoped it would keep the little one from wasting herself. It did, but it still had its toll on her. Shaking, nervousness, sleeplessness. She couldn't continue to see her like this either and had to let her go. To her surprise, when Sue waited for her sister at the bar to control her alcohol consumption, Ophelia didn't arrive. Wanting to look for her, Sue rushed from one bar to another, but her little corn snake wasn't there. She wasn't in her room as well. Nobody had seen her anywhere else. The next day she found her sitting on the training grounds. She must have gotten the drugs somewhere else, because her condition was the same as before. Sue tried to scold her, but the reaction she got was the opposite of what she had expected. Hysterical laughter paired with a hint of anger. Offended, Sue had demanded an explanation for the strange behavior, but Ophelia snapped and shouted at her to keep her nose out of her sister's life. She screamed back, calling her immature and naive. It ended with them parting. Ophelia stomped back towards the castle, while Sue blew off some steam, thrusting a sword into a wooden armor stand. They didn't speak for a week. They even avoided each other during mealtime, shifts, and training whenever they could. After 3 days, Sue began to feel there was a mistake on her own side. Someone younger than her had to cope with the loss of another parent, and she had called her sister's reaction immature. But her pride kept her from openly admitting to it until 4 more days had passed. Then she knocked on her little sister's door, sat down on the edge of the bed, and talked softly to her. Ophelia didn't speak, but there was something scornful in her demeanor which threw Sue off. The night had already fallen upon the land. The older sister had just finished her apologies and waited for a response of acceptance. It never came. She just said that Sue could never understand her feelings and shouldn't even try. This enraged Sue once again, but the knocking on the door kept them from breaking out into another argument. Ophelia shrunk into a pile for 1 second before she opened the door. There stood a servant in typical robes with a porcelain cup on a plate. Like a moth into the fire, she took it in an instant, consumed it as if it was her life essence, and slammed it into the ground so hard the shards splattered in all directions. The servant was about to turn around to leave, but Ophelia seized him by the collar and pulled him close. Like a madman, she snarled, "Tell the bastard not to bother, because I already carry his goddess-forsaken child." Then she collapsed. Knockout roots. Sue immediately recognized the smell after lifting the unconscious body into the bed. She didn't know how many times Ophelia had taken them, but enough to make her dependent on its calming effect. Not long after, she was taken from her. There was no warning and not a hint. Ophelia had disappeared without a trace just a few days after. When they did meet again, Alba had already been born and Ophelia was completely sobered up. They didn't talk. Because of the silence between them, Sue couldn't know that her sister had changed unit to one of protecting carriages and messengers during times of crisis. She went away 1 month later and didn't return. People reported an attack during the night. Some say Ophelia was still asleep when she was stabbed to death, while others claimed she had been on night duty but took off her armor while threatening an attacker to kill her or die himself. In the end, it turned out she hadn't been on night duty, and her dead body was found without armor and a mad smile on her lips. Dew wanted to tear the scroll to shreds as he held it in his trembling hands. What did the promise of safety mean if the one giving it would break it? The soft and neat strokes of ink he had admired not 2 months ago twisted into being a rope swiftly knotting itself into a clue around its admirer's neck. Though he couldn't destroy the paper that would save his life again if necessary, there were those little paper strips. He got sick counting them while one after the other ended up in tiny pieces on a pile on the desk. As soon as he got fire, Dew swore he would burn them or drown them or put them in the king's food so he would choke on it. Out. Dew wanted to go out. It was midday and the gate was open. A walk through the forest would be good. Maybe he was overreacting. No. Not that, just over-interpreting perhaps. Avery had never been an addict, right? Never. But he never drank or ate anything. Everything he took in, he spat out in an instant. At this point, Dew was convinced the hybrid consumed sun rays to receive energy. Was that a hint in favor or against the scenario? And Avery had never created a new life. But what if he couldn't? Dew wanted to tear out his own hair, tear down those trees around him and tear apart that monster so it would tell him he was wrong with his suspicion. But then it would die, slowly and painfully, choking on his own blood and insides if that was possible. Dew didn't know Ophelia, but he didn't have to feel her betrayal and rage as if she was right next to him. The more he unwillingly thought about it, the less obvious an answer appeared to him. It was as if he didn't even know the person he had felt so connected to, had loved so much. Even though he felt guilty for it, he questioned his own feelings towards his roommate. How selfish. This wasn't about him. He took a turn on a road fork towards the training area. Because of the sun, which was still beaming down sadistically, many knights were training and chatting outside. How many of those knew? How many of those incompetent assholes were slurring at Avery for something that shouldn't in any way determine one's worth? Dew passed by quickly. The path continued on. Now different constellations of trees made up the forest. He could not only see pine trees, some oak trees, but also beech trees as well. He began to calm down as not a single noise of a person could be heard. Only the singing of birds and the rustling in the leaves from last autumn paired with a fine breeze filled the air. Dew took a deep breath. His feet were hurting, those shoes were of no use on uneven ground and would only cause blisters over time, so he took them off. It felt so familiar, walking barefoot, going through nature without any specific purpose, except to just free oneself from the troubles of such a damned human world. The area became weirdly familiar. The road, the trees, even the smell. He kept going, automatically taking a specific turn whenever the way split up into two. He knew where to go, even though he didn't. It was evening, and he could see the sun before him, where he felt there would be a clearing. And there was. Just before he reached it, he could smell the lake. It looked even prettier in the daylight, with the taller grass and greenish water. He had only been there 3 times, and now he actually knew how to get to this place. Dew came closer to the water, taking in the glittering of the rippling surface and the chattering of birds. Somewhere a tiny river ended up in the lake, and its splashing sounds could be heard like a melody. Then he saw him. In the grass, almost fully hidden, he was laying with his wings folded and knees pulled towards his chest. His wet hair glowed in the bright sunlight. The black cape was next to him, soaked in water, while the rest of his clothes were almost completely dry. Dew's heart jumped. Whether it was anger towards Avery for simply disappearing, or desperation to talk that rose inside of him, he couldn't tell, yet he forced himself not to do anything rash, but just to silently sit beside the other. Avery wasn't sleeping. His finger twitched as Dew came into his vision. There were wet bandages in the grass all around the hybrid. Dew didn't look at him at first, but that rapidly changed as his friend curled up as he choked and water spouted out of his mouth and nose. Then he went back to laying there, unmoving. After another moment of silence, he whispered, "I can leave if you want to swim." Dew was perplexed. I don't want to swim. And I don't want you to leave." It wouldn't make sense for him to leave even if Dew wanted to swim. There was nothing Avery didn't know about him, so why would it matter? To his own surprise, Dew figured it wouldn't make a difference. He felt the same way about it as before. Avery choked again and more water came out. This strange behavior frightened Dew. What did Avery do? "Did you sleep?" the sitting one asked. Avery gazed at the sky. "Somewhat. About 16 hours or so." Dew looked at the wet hair. "You passed out." There was no response. Dew looked at the dry clothes while the events of last night began to form in his mind. On purpose. Dew turned his head further into the grass as if it could hide his trembling lips and bloodshot eyes. "What did you do? You can't swim." The hybrid still didn't respond. "Did you—" Dew began, but the other one lifted his hand, signaling him to stop. This was his fault. How could he have been so stupid and did not immediately notice how much harm his self-centered reaction to Avery's reveal caused? He could have died if not for whatever reason that kept the hybrid from drowning himself again. "I didn't think enough before turning away," he choked. "It wasn't supposed to look like I did, and I'm—" Dew couldn't finish his sentence. The last word felt stuck in his throat. Movement came into Avery's body. Slowly he sat up. "It doesn't matter," he answered. "The mistake was with me." Avery got to his feet, picked up the cape while almost losing his balance, and began to stumble towards the path Dew had arrived at. "Where are you going?" Dew jumped up and followed after him. We'll see. Give it a day or two and there will probably be a notice somewhere. Hey! The cry escaped Dew's mouth before he could form anything which could hold his best friend from leaving permanently. His fingers dug themselves into Avery's ropes as if they were a lifeline. The knight's body was so limp, no attempt to free himself was made at first. Slowly his dead eyes made their way towards the one clinging on to him. You got things to do, your brother, remember? You want to find him, we'll live together, and if we don't get along... Avery's hoarse voice completed his sentence. I'll build a wall between you two. I remember. Dew's arms frantically tried to place themselves on the hybrid's shoulders and torso as he hunched over to release more water from his lungs. In horror, Dew noticed the fluids now streaming from the trembling lips had a red tint. With the back of his hand, Avery wiped it away. Would you look at that? He forced out of his throat, but was interrupted by another cough. Even my own body wants me dead for sure. Scratch the idea with us. Go find him if you're desperate enough. I'm not. Now that Dew had stopped properly gripping the other, he felt the clothes slipping from his fingers, and like a falling man reaching for a root on the side of a cliff, he pursued this person whom half of his world consisted of. Just in time he grasped him, pulling him backwards with enough strength to make him almost fall over. Before he could, Dew slung his arms tightly around the lower torso. We've been here before, the shorter one shouted, and you regretted trying it, or would you prefer me dead? Those words had Avery snap around, shoving Dew far away from him. Small update for you, he growled as if putting down a rebellious servant. You are an adult now. You can take care of yourself. My brother has people who take care of him too. And that's why you kill yourself? It's 1 year, Avery, 1. You'll find yourself eventually, Dew talked back, anger short from boiling over. The hybrid's face shifted from mildly annoyed to enraged. Because 1 year is so easy, huh? Slowly and heavily the fuming dragon hybrid took one step after the other towards the other, who backed off as if he could feel the dizzying heat from the creature. Dew could only listen in fear of being burned as Avery went on. Every damned year I had the pleasure of figuring out another way in which I'm useless. Last year I was supposed to watch my closest comrade's root consume. Now he's dead. 2 years ago I was supposed to support part of my unit to stay safe. I ended up laying there and watched one by one be beaten to death. The first year I could not even withstand the standard beginner training, so I switched units to the most pathetic excuse of a man there is. And lastly, Avery stopped approaching, having come to a standstill. With every sentence a piece of the rage had evaporated, until the heat was no more and the steam came down like rain. The dragon was crying. In the second year, every week for 2 years, and all of it to learn my body can't create new life. I can do nothing but kill. He tried not to sob, and then he added, looking Dew directly into the eyes, You've fallen for a whore, Dew. It was as if someone had shattered all the bones in his chest at once. Please tell me that's not true, Dew wanted to beg, but he couldn't even whisper the first word.